Hi, welcome to my channel and welcome to my home studio. Today we're going to be talking about tracking to tape in 2024. Why do that instead of using Pro Tools or Logic or something similar? But in particular, I'm going to be showing you how I do that. Okay, we're talking about Analogue Tape. This is a 10-inch reel of half-inch tape, which I use on my 8-track tape machine. I'm going to show you that in detail after this introduction. I don't use Pro Tools or Logic or any computer software. I record in a purely analog process using a conventional mixing desk and conventional analog outboard hardware, so effects and compressors. The only concession I make to the digital age is that I have a digital recorder, a Zoom H4, which records onto SD card in 24-bit 96 kilohertz, so very, very high resolution. I master onto that direct from the desk. So briefly, I've used Pro Tools in the past and I didn't like it. I found sitting there staring at a computer screen, watching a river of waveforms going by, tedious. And the only hands-on aspect of it is using a mouse, whereas with a mixing desk you're using both hands, and for some reason I simply find it a lot more exciting, a lot more interesting. It's also more challenging because it's more limited. Pro Tools gives you endless possibilities. You can use as many tracks as you want, there's no limit. You can have as many takes of a particular instrument as you want, there's no limit to that. The editing possibilities are endless. You've got all the effects, plugins, whatever that you can use that obviously are virtual, so they take up no space. The whole thing can be run on a laptop, which you can carry around with you, you can use anywhere. It has its advantages, but in my opinion it's those advantages, those endless possibilities, that change the way music is made, and it no longer is about performance, it's about perfection. And perfection is all very well, but it can kill performance. And I think Miles Davis said he'd rather have a really passionate solo with 2 or 3 really awful bum notes than a perfect solo. And I would tend to agree. So it's the recording process, the way you use Pro Tools or you have to use Pro Tools that I don't like, and I like the challenge of having a limited number of tracks. Working on my own, I almost always have to play the whole track all the way through. I don't have a lot of option about dropping in, simply because I only have 2 hands, and I sit here with my guitar. I have record here handy, and I can, under certain circumstances, drop in on a guitar track, maybe on a bass track, that's tricky. A vocal, maybe I could replace a chorus, but it's very risky, and I tend to try to play the whole song all the way through on each instrument, or sing it all the way through on each part. And that means it's a true performance, it's an honest performance. It's not going to be perfect, but I just find it more interesting and more real. There's no pitch correction, there's no auto-tune, no cheating of any kind. It's the real thing. And that's the way people used to record. All the music I loved the most was recorded on tape. I grew up with the Beatles, the Stones, all those 60s and 70s bands. All that was on analog tape, and in my opinion that's why it sounds so good. So yeah, I'm an analog dinosaur. I stubbornly refuse to use any kind of computer stuff when I'm recording. The end results you can judge for yourself. There are three playlists of my music on this channel. I've got an LP called Pop Picnic. I've got a maxi EP called Seaside Stories, and I've got 3 or 4 cover versions, including some jazz instrumentals, a couple of Miles Davis things which were very challenging. So there's a wealth of stuff you can dip into, and all of it was recorded in this home studio, basically my 2-bedroom flat, on my 40-year-old 8-track reel-to-reel tape machine. Okay, enjoy. Okay, quick word about the tape itself. This is a 10-inch reel of half-inch tape, which is around, it's exactly twice as wide as 1/4-inch tape, the most common domestic tape that you may have seen. Tape goes up to 1 inch and then to 2 inch. In the good old days, professional studios would have 2-inch tape machines, 24-track. That was the standard up until the mid to late 90s, and then the digital age began in most studios, and Pro Tools pretty much took over in the millennium. It's horrendously expensive. This costs about 140 euros, 130 euros, depending on where you buy it. But at least it is still manufactured, or it's manufactured again. This is from France, RTM, very good. This is 30 minutes of music, which may horrify you. Why should you pay 140 euros for 30 minutes of music? But of course you can use it more than once. I would say you could probably use it 5 or 6 times, absolutely no problem. If it gets a bit more than that, you might start to notice a slight loss of treble, but I'd say up to 10 or a dozen times you're pretty safe. As it gets older, it would be unwise to record over it again, because the coating deteriorates with age. But it's expensive, but it sounds good. It has its own, it and the machine have their way of gently compressing the sound, and if you push the level right up to, let's say, about 6 dB, plus 6 dB, you get a very nice kind of tape compression and a warmth that you'll need some kind of plug-in to get anywhere near in Pro Tools. I just like it. It's a bit similar to how people like picking up vinyl records and holding them in their hands and staring endlessly at the cover. Holding one of these, it's pretty heavy in your hand, and loading it onto the tape machine is a kind of ritual, and yeah, it reminds me of musically what I consider to be better times. Okay, so now I'll give you a guided tour of my home studio. So this is my tape machine. It's a Tascam 3.8. It's a half-inch 8-track multi-track machine, considered to be a semi-pro in terms of quality. It's getting on for 40 years old. I think late 80s, mid to late 80s was the time they were built or that they were introduced. Then state of the art for musicians who had a few quid to spare and wanted to record some proper demos at home. I bought it probably when it was about 12, 14 years old, almost towards the end of the 90s. I used it for about 15 years, but then it started to have problems. It got put into retirement for about 10 years, and then around 2 years ago I took it apart, replaced the drive belt, cleaned it up, did a bit of general TLC, and got it going again. And it's actually working on 7 of the 8 channels. 1 is completely dead, 1 is intermittent, so I'm really down to 6 channels. 1 I use for a click track, and I've got 5 that are reliable for individual instruments, which for my purposes is fine. Okay, the tape runs over the heads here. We've got the erase head on the left, the record or sync head, record head in the middle, and the playback head on the right. And okay, here we've got the standard controls, play, stop, rewind, fast forward. You've got a pause, and here's your record button. To go into record, if you're pressing buttons here, I've actually got a remote control next to the desk, so I don't have to come down here and press buttons. But you press play, and then you press play and record simultaneously, and it will go into record. Down here we've got the output select. At the moment it's on repro, so that's just playback. When I'm recording, or when you're recording, you want to be in the sync mode, because then you're listening off the record head and you'll be in sync with what's been recorded beforehand. If you don't do that, if you record in repro mode, you'll be about, I don't know how many milliseconds away from in time, but you'll be not in time. So we use sync when we're recording, and to record on a particular channel you simply press one of these, or you can press all of them if you want, but generally I only record one channel at a time. So let's say I want to record drums, that's I'd arm track 7 or channel 7 ready to record. So just to see it in action, there we've got play and stop. You can see the tensioners here are moving up and down to allow the tape to actually come into contact with the heads or not. Okay, so rewind. And I had it, okay, it finds 0 automatically, or fairly near it, and is very gentle with the tape. It goes backwards and forwards gently until it settles somewhere near 0. But if we continue to rewind, you'll get an idea of how powerful the motors are and how fast the tape can actually move. And it has brakes, so it doesn't just jolt to a halt, it brakes itself gently. Okay, that's basically it. Once this machine's running, I mean, there are all kinds of adjustments you can make, but I've tried not to meddle with too much, provided I'm getting reasonable results when I'm recording, which I am. But one thing you do have to do is clean what we call the tape path. So everywhere, every piece of metal that the tape touches on its way from one reel to the next, you have to clean, because the tape has an oxide composition as a coating, and that gets deposited on the metal parts of the tape path gradually, tiny amounts, but it's a kind of brown powder that sticks to the metal parts. And the older the tape is, the more oxide will shed. You have to clean that off with isopropyl alcohol, isopropanol, so 99% pure alcohol, and always have a big box of Q-tips handy, or some kind of cotton swab. And you have to go through this tape path completely, but most importantly the heads, the surface of the heads here that comes into contact with the tape, they need to be cleaned before and after every session. So if I record for 3, 4, 5 hours during a day, I'll always have cleaned the tape heads and the tape path beforehand, and at least at the beginning of the next session I'll clean them again. So always start the day with clean heads. If you don't, you'll start to lose treble, the recordings will start to sound muffled, and it can in the long term actually damage the heads. So that's a kind of chore, but it takes 5 minutes and it's something you get used to. And a little TLC for such a wonderful machine is a small price to pay. If you wanted to buy one of these in good working order, you're looking at probably 1,500 euros, maybe 2,000 euros for something that's really been serviced properly and all the moving parts have been checked and possibly refurbished, things like belts, but the whole thing's been properly calibrated. That's very important. I've never done that. I've left it alone. Okay, so that's the machine. We'll move on to other parts of the studio, the desk, the effects, and the various instrument corners. So enjoy. So this is my mixing desk. It's a Soundcraft MPM22. I bought this about 16 years ago. Cost about 600 euros. You could probably pick one up in good condition for about the same these days, which is an absolute bargain. It sounds great, and for 8-track recording it's plenty big enough. I actually had a 16-track recorder and I managed to record with that using this. Okay, but I'll walk you through it, starting with the inputs. At the back we've got 20 mic inputs, they're matched for mic impedance. Then we got 20 line inputs, which speaks for itself. I've got the first 8 assigned to the outputs of the tape machine, so they appear on these faders here. Then we got 20 inserts. We use them, or I use them, everybody uses them for compressors. So you can route the signal to the compressor and then back to the channel with one cable. That's a kind of stereo cable. Then we got the red controls. We've got the gain input gain, so that's the amount, the level of signal that's coming into the desk. We'll talk about how we measure that when we get a bit further down the desk. Here we've got 100 Hertz shelf, so that will filter out anything below 100 Hertz. That's more or less sub-bass. It's very deep bass that can make certain instruments sound muddy. You certainly don't need it on the human voice or guitar. Bass guitar, it depends what kind of sound you want. Bass drum again, you might want to have it off or on depending on the music. But that's an option. That's kind of part of the EQ. The EQ has 4 controls. We've got high frequency, we've got mid frequency, but this is actually what we call a sweep control. This is the amount of a boost or cut in the mid frequency. This is where in the mid frequency you boost or cut it, so you can sweep through from about 150 Hertz to up to 2,500 Hertz. So you've got quite a wide range. And the last one is low frequency, or bass you might say, boost or cut. So that's the EQ section. Here we've got aux 1, aux 2, aux 3. These are auxiliary inputs, and this again will be connected to an external device. Usually you'll have your effects on here. That's what I've got. I've got 3 different reverb echo type effects connected to these. When we get down to the faders, I'll explain how we dose that into the mix. And here we've got pan, obviously left, right, or center. Okay. Here we've got a mute control, very useful when you want to silence everything else except the track or tracks you want to hear. Here we've got the PFL button. That's how you check your gain. So while your signal is coming in, while the track's running, you can press this, it will light up red, and or at least the red light will light here, and you'll get a readout of just that signal on the main LEDs here. And you generally, we're talking analog domain here, we don't have to worry about being over 0, so I generally get it as far up to closest to +6 I can get, with maybe the occasional flicker in the red zone. If it's overloading, there's a red light here which will warn you. It's fine if that flickers occasionally. That means you're on absolute maximum level. You don't want it to be on for any length of time, because that will be probably be distorting. Here you can assign your track to mix, the main mix or group. Okay, and then we've got the main, the faders for the channels. Here I've got the drums. Normally, everything else I record, I go into a valve preamp and then straight into the tape machine. I bypass the desk on the way into the tape machine, but everything that comes from the tape machine goes through the desk. So what I record is actually as pure and untouched as I possibly can get it. I don't put compression or any effects on it onto tape. I leave that as pure as possible, so I've got the future option of treating it how I want. But the drums I do route through the mixing desk, simply because I've got to reduce it down to mono to save tracks. And when you're recording, if I've already got something recorded, I want to have the drums on a separate output. Okay, they're routed, they're panned hard left, and they're assigned to the group mix, the secondary bus or output of the desk. And so I've got this red left channel fader up. That's then going to the tape machine. Very important is I've EQ'd the drums individually, so that what I end up with is pretty much a ready mix. I don't have to do anything to the drums when they come back in mono. The level's right, the balance is right. All I might do is put a little bit of reverb, a kind of room ambience of some to make it a bit more live sounding. But I spent a great deal of time, 2 or 3 weeks, experimenting with the EQ of each individual mic on the drum kit. I'm going to be showing you that later in the video. And what I've ended up with is what sounds really good, what sits well with its neighbours. I'll run you through the EQ very quickly. On the bass drum, I've got a 300 Hertz 9 dB cut, and I've got a little bit of bass boost. On the snare drum, I've got some about 3 dB of high frequency boost. I've got about 3 dB cut at about 300 Hertz, and I've got a little bit of the bass rolled off, about 3 dB of bass cut. This is an overhead mic, so it's only really picking up the cymbals, the top end of the kit. I've got a bit of high frequency boost to give it a little bit of bit more brilliance, and I've got the bass rolled off completely, so that will help stop the bass drum leaking through and the bass part of the snare drum leaking through. And cymbals obviously don't really have any bass frequencies, so that's kind of redundant, but that helps to kind of trim or filter that microphone. And the floor tom I've got flat. It doesn't really need any EQ, it sounds good as it is. And as I said, I spent a long time balancing them, and I got the gains set so that they're fairly reasonable here, as high as possible, and that the whole thing works when the mic faders are at 0 dB. This is our 0 dB. You may not be able to see the little 0, but that's where we work from. Okay, this is a track I've lined up that we're going to listen to in the next part of the video, or later in the video. These are my 3 effects units. I've got a Space Echo, an Alesis Quadriverb, that's a multi-effect unit, but I usually use the reverbs and the halls and the plates, and a Lexicon reverb. Okay, they're at about -5, so I haven't got too much of them in the mix, but important is that this is what we call the wet signal from the effect unit. It's only the affected part of the sound, not the dry part of the sound. If you have the dry sound here, for example on guitar, and you have a kind of 60-40 mix from your effect unit, you're going to get the dry signal twice, and you don't really want that, at least not in a recording situation. So you've got the effect, the affected whatever it is instrument here, and you've got the dry signal over here, and you can balance the two. You've got infinite ways to alter the balance and change the sound. Obviously you can use these faders to have more or less of the effect, but this seems to be the very the kind of sweet spot to have them. And here you can reduce or increase the dry signal, and if you bring the dry signal back a little bit, you start to notice the reverb a lot more, and it seems to kind of step into the background, which can be quite a nice effect, kind of three-dimensional effect in the mix. Okay, so that's the mixing desk so far. The next thing to look at will be the mixing desk in action. So I'll be playing you a track and looking at the individual instruments, listening to them isolated and with each other, and talking about that. Okay. So now we're going to have a look at the mixing desk in action. I've got some music I recorded all lined up on tape. It's actually a cover of a Miles Davis number called Milestones. A rather ambitious cover, if I may say so, with just guitars and no brass instruments. And I'm certainly not a jazz drummer, but when you hear the track in full, I think it sounds more than acceptable. Okay, so let's assume that I've just finished the sessions for this track, and I've got the tracks lined up. I've done a little bit of signal, EQ, whatever, adjusting the levels and the sound of each individual track, and I've adjusted the main faders accordingly, so I've got a reasonably good balance and what we call a rough mix, something that might actually be okay, but might need a little bit of tweaking. So we'll mute the, we've got two guitars here, two rhythm guitars. We've got bass, we've got a solo guitar, okay, and we've got drums. So we'll leave the drums up, and we'll just listen to them for a second. Okay, it doesn't sound much, mostly ride cymbal, occasional bass drum beat, and the rim shot, fairly classic jazz thing. Okay, I could put some echo on it, but I think it sounds fine for the time being. Next up, we'll have a listen to the bass. Okay, that doesn't sound like a string bass, but it's got a nice elastic timbre to it. I've got some mid-cut here. I've got about, yeah, it's at about 560, 550, 560 hertz. I've got about 6 dB of cut here. That's taking the woodiness out of it, the kind of cardboardy quality that bass can have when it's not EQ'd. Okay, next I generally listen to the bass and drums together. That makes sense because they're the rhythm section and you want them to complement each other. So you don't want the bass drum to swamp the bass, and you don't want the bass guitar to swamp the bass drum. In terms of volume or sound, they ought to kind of complement each other and obviously be kind of locked in together in the rhythm. Let's have a listen to them together. Okay, that sounds pretty good. In terms of balance, that's fine. So next we'll have a listen to the rhythm guitar. Okay, I've got that dry. I've got no echo, no reverb on it. I've got it panned at about 2 o'clock to the right, because I've got a solo guitar as well, which I've actually got panned in the middle. And it's always good to keep your guitars a little bit away from each other, not if you're in stereo. You tend to hear them better if they're slightly apart in the mix, but it doesn't have to be too far. Okay, next up we'll have a listen to the solo guitar. Okay, that's actually a Telecaster, which not the most common guitar used for jazz, but sounds pretty cool to me. Had a little bit of bass rolled off here, -6, and quite a bit of treble boost, 6 dB. And possibly most importantly, I've got the Lexicon reverb. That's the aux 3 effect unit. That's almost an antique now. I think it's early 80s. An LXP1. We'll be having a look at that in the effects section later in the video. And it's the small plate, and I really love the sound of it. But I've got the guitar, the dry signal of the guitar, down a little bit, so that gives a chance for the wet signal to come through, and that gives it this slightly in the distance, slightly in the back of the room effect, which is lovely. Okay, we'll have a listen to the whole track. So that's sounding, for a rough mix, that sounds to my ears pretty good. And that's a small example of, okay, what I do here, but more importantly, what you can do with a fairly basic setup, and how multi-track recording works in the analog domain. I'm going to play you the beginning of the track with all the instruments, because there's one part of that, it's part of the theme. There's actually, I couldn't think of a way to play it on the guitar, or at least on just one guitar, so I decided to divide it into two parts, which is, I think, more or less what the brass section did on the Miles Davis recording. You'll see what I mean when you hear it. Okay, here. So you can hear there, the two guitars are playing a kind of staggered chord sequence, left and right. I'll see if I can find that and play only that. Okay, here it is without the drums and bass. So that's how you can imitate a jazz band with multi-track recording. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed that. Next we're going to have a look at the effects section, what they are, what they do. Then I'm going to take you around the studio. I'm going to show you the drum department, guitar corner. Okay, so enjoy. So this is the effects department, my effects rack, and a few other things on top of it. I'll take you through kind of from top to bottom. This is a Presonus Tube Pre valve preamp. I use that for vocals, percussion, for the guitar mic, and I use it also with the bass guitar plugged directly, so DI, for recording, and that's routed directly to the tape machine, so bypassing the desk. I've got the output assigned here, so I can patch that to any of the 8 Tascam inputs here, the tape machine inputs, with a short jack-to-jack lead. Okay, next to that, this is a Zoom H4 digital recorder. It's about 20 years old now, but it was one of the very first high-resolution digital recorders, and that's my mastering machine. That's my only concession to the digital age, is that to share your music you've got to have it in digital form, so I master to an SD card in the H4, at 24-bit 96 kilohertz, so very, very high resolution, and that's then reduced down to about CD quality for YouTube videos and elsewhere. Okay, this is a vintage Lexicon reverb, delay, flange, chorus, multi-effects unit, but it's famous for its wonderful plate reverbs and room and hall reverbs. It's late 80s, I think about 1988. I bought it last year for a song, as it's slightly damaged. Some of the jack inputs are damaged at the back, but they work. It has a flashing light that you can't turn off. That's about the only disadvantage, but it sounds fantastic. That we heard on the, you will hear on the playback that I do with a track that you'll hear on the solo guitar. Okay, so that's one of my main effects. That's routed to aux 3. Here we've got the modern version of the Space Echo, the Roland Space Echo tape delay. This is in digital form, simulated in a pedal. I've got it side on. I can't really show you too much about the controls, but it's basically a duplicate of the old tape echo, Space Echo, and I use that mostly for a slapback echo, but occasionally for longer delays. It sounds absolutely fantastic. Okay, underneath that I've got a CD player. That's simply there for reference in case I want to listen to something quickly on the same headphones, and I can switch perhaps from the track to the CD to compare my kind of production to something that I'm possibly looking for in terms of sound. Okay, here we've got the compressor section. I've got two compressors. I've got a DBX266XS, which is the cheapest of the range, two-channel mono, or you can actually couple them to make it a stereo compressor. I use it for individual instruments. Basically this I use for bass and rhythm guitar. It's slightly better than this one, the Behringer Multicom, which is a 4-channel compressor. Sounds slightly different but does basically the same job. I've got that assigned to track 4 or channel 4 on the desk, channel 5, so that'll probably be guitar, vocal, percussion, whatever, and channel 7 is always drums, so I've got that this channel assigned to the drum channel on the desk. And these, of course, if you remember, go via the insert connections on the desk for the track channels. Okay, below that I've got another vintage effect unit. This is early 90s, about 93 I bought this, so over 30 years ago. Alesis Quadriverb. It was one of the first multi-effects units on the market. This does just about everything except make the coffee. I use it mainly for its reverbs and halls again, but it does have all kinds of tricks up its sleeve. Okay, below that, very important, I've got a patch bay. One thing it's nice to avoid is to have to plug in or unplug lots of leads while you're or during a session while you're recording. You really want to have everything, especially if, like me, you work on your own, have everything to hand within arm's reach. So I've got the inputs to the tape machine routed here, and the preamp out I've got routed here, so I can take, let's say from the preamp I've got a mic, I can take it to a particular channel, or if I've got the bass in the preamp, I'll take it to track 2 or 3 probably. Okay, I've got the group, the secondary mix or bus outputs routed here. I use that when the drums are recording, so I'll take the left-hand channel in mono. That will have all the 4 drum mics mixed down to mono. I'll take that up here to input 7. I've got the main output, left and right, routed to my mastering machine, my H4 digital recorder. So that's ready to take what's coming off the main mix to the desk directly into the digital recorder. Okay, below that is a guitar tuner, which I don't use. I use a clip-on tuner, but this is great because it's especially for live situations, as you have this huge display that you can see at about 20 meters if necessary. So that's the effects section. Coming up, I'll be taking you around the various corners of the studio, the drums, guitar, and yeah, I hope you learned something. So this is Drum Corner. I'll give you a quick run round my little drum kit. It's the remnants of a no-name kit I was given about 15 years ago. Sadly, the larger components of it got drowned in a flood 3 years ago. But before that, I'd stashed most of it here, particularly the cymbals, which are actually quite good ones. And more recently, last year, I got the kiddie bass drum that you can see in the corner. That's both space-saving and quieter and less bassy than a full-size bass drum. I've got the no-name snare with the Ringo Starr tea towel. That was his standard method of damping, or at least the engineer's method that they seem to adopt for his drums. That tightens it up a bit and quietens it down ever so slightly. It takes the very sharp top end off the snare, but it does actually tighten the sound up somehow. And on the floor, no-name tom-tom. Okay, round the cymbals, I've got a large, it's actually a crash on the right, but I use it as a ride cymbal. Next to that, I've got a splash cymbal, which is actually my crash cymbal. Not so loud as a full-size cymbal, and you don't have to hit it so hard to get a convincing crash. Hi-hats are paste. Then I've got on the left 2 cymbals, one on top of the other. There's a china on the top, which is quite kind of tinny, and it's another crash underneath, but I use that again as a ride. It has a slightly darker timbre than the other one. And on the far left, a set of chimes, which I use very occasionally. And I've got a whole bunch of percussion in the box, which I can pull out. I've got a tambourine, I've got a jawbone, I've got shakers, all kinds of stuff that gets used very occasionally, but it's nice to have it in reserve. Okay, there are 4 mics on the kit. It's fairly simple. These are routed round the edge of the room and back into the next door living room where the mixing desk is. Starting on the left, over the hi-hat and the left-hand cymbals, I've got a Behringer. It's a copy of a Shaw SM58 Unisphere. It's a cheap copy, but it's fine. It's good enough for an overhead mic or a vocal mic. That's picking up the top end of the kit. The ride is on the right is loud enough to be picked up by that too. I've got the bass rolled off completely on that mic, so it's not picking up too much of the bass drum and the snare, hopefully. On the snare, I've got a SM57, a Shure Unidyne, which is a great all-rounder mic. Highly recommended. If you only have one mic in your studio, then get one of those. You can use it for absolutely everything, including vocals. As you can see, I've got it set vertically towards the edge of the snare skin. You can experiment with angles and positions for the snare mic, but that's fairly standard. So it's picking up mostly the top end of the snare with less boom than if you pointed it towards the middle. You can't see it, slightly out of shot, I think, but the floor tom has a clip mic, a small condenser mic, clipped to the edge of the drum, the rim of the drum. That's about 1.5 inches to 2 inches away, again from the outer area of the skin. The bass drum, if you look closely, you can see a small circular hole to the right, on what's actually the front skin of the bass drum, but it's at the back from here. And if you look very closely, you can see there's a microphone just actually in the hole, so to speak, not inside the drum or outside it, but actually in the hole. And that's a Sennheiser E603. That's what they call the brick mic. It's a kind of rectangular block, looks like a kind of block of ice cream, but grey. And that's a good all-rounder mic and seems to work pretty well as a bass drum mic. I think it rolls off the really deep bottom end, which is what I want it to do. That's fine. So that's the 4 mics, and they're routed to the desk, as I said, and I actually mix them down. I pre-mix them down to mono and EQ them before they go to the tape machine. So this is guitar corner, or at least this is the corner where the guitar amp lives. That's right over the other side of the room from the mixing desk where I'm sitting. Not much to say. Small Fender Frontman 15 transistor amp. It looks exactly like a Princeton, but it's transistor. It's this is about 20 years old, something like that. It sounds absolutely fantastic for an amp that costs about €100. It sounds remarkably Fenderish. That distinctive kind of almost metallic sound that the expensive Fender amps get, the clean sound, it can do that brilliantly. It has overdrive too, but I tend not to use that, although it's quite convincing once it's recorded, but it doesn't sound very convincing in the room. The pedal that's sitting on top of the amp, the Dark Matter TC Electronic, that's actually more of a kind of heavy metal, doom metal type pedal, but on the low, if you keep the gain really low, as you can see, I've got it down to about 2 or 3, it's got a really nice crunch, slight crunch sound that sounds really close to a valve amp being driven hard. So that into the Fender amp clean makes a great sound, and the Unidyne picks it up brilliantly. Usually I just need to roll a little bass off, compress it gently, and it sounds great on tape. Couple of other effects there. Crybaby is an absolute must. I've always had a crybaby ever since I played in bands in my teens. Fantastic wah-wah pedal, an absolute must. Couple of electro harmonics pedals, flanger on the left and kind of univibe imitation on the right. I don't use them very often at all, but it's nice to have them in reserve. They're a bit kind of specialized. I don't use an awful lot of effects apart from the wah-wah and the dark matter distortion pedal. That's about it. I've got a couple of other distortion pedals or fuzz boxes, but they get taken off the shelf about once a year, and that's nice, but most of these effects are things you don't really want to be using too often, unless you want to create a kind of signature sound. But I tend to go for cleaner sounds and just use a bit of crunch on the lead guitar. So that's the guitar corner. I think that wraps up the studio corners for now. Hope you've enjoyed it. Keep watching.